U.S. intelligence agency mind control.
We also love Stephen Crowder talking about the Civil War.
Oh, God.
The Civil War. If you thought that the idea of another civil war was dominating the political conversation 5 years ago when I first brought you this video, try taking a look at social media now. Seems like every week there's a new headline or some new pundit asking, is the United States headed for another civil war?
Stop watching Tim Pool, Stephen. It's only Tim Pool.
Is civil war imminent? What comes next? The civil war? It's civil war. Spoiler alert. Heck, Alex Garland even took a creative risk and wrote a whole film about the idea titled Civil War.
He had an American masterclass with a historian, so we can really understand the Civil War. So this could be a hit or miss. If it seems like kind of normal, I'm going to skip it. If they go full,
What I'm waiting for
which is what I'm expecting.
Is him to basically say the Democrats are the ones that were the South in the Civil War.
Yes,
and then everything else be normal.
So if repeating history is to be avoided, then as it relates to the Civil War in the United States, it's important to know how, but more important to know why. Only the person who can answer the why of history.
No. It's real simple.
And even hope to avoid the doom of repeating it.
It's real simple, okay? So the founding fathers, especially Washington, are pussies. That's why the Civil War happened. The end.
Sure.
Okay, so the Missouri Compromise is really what excels it, and that's when you get the Bleeding Kansas event with John Brown.
Is that when they killed him?
Well, John Brown got hung.
Yeah, okay.
He was captured. But so Bleeding Kansas is before John Brown's like specific revolution. So what happens is that they make it so first of all, they kick it down the road, right? And then it comes to Missouri Compromise, which is the youngest founding father. What's his name? He's a pussy too. 1 second. Missouri Compromise.
Yeah, I'm not sure on this one.
1820. Let me just check who the president was. James Monroe. So James Monroe, basically, he's pussy. He's the youngest of the founding fathers. His presidency in 1820 is the last of the first era of America.
Okay.
And so basically what they make is like, it makes it so the Missouri Compromise was a federal legislation of the United States that balanced desires of northern states to prevent the expansion of slavery in the country and those southern states to expand it. It admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state and declared policy of prohibiting slavery and remaining Louisiana purchased lands north of the 36th parallel. The 16th United States Congress passed the legislation on March 3rd, 1820. President James Monroe signed it into law on March 6th. Okay? So what happens here is that basically, as a result, states can choose whether they want to be slave states or free states.
Mm-hmm.
And then that leads to Bleeding Kansas, where all these people start pouring into Kansas.
Okay.
To make it a free state or a slave state, which causes a micro civil war inside Kansas.
Oh my God.
Right? And that's what John Brown's sons, they all go to Bleeding Kansas. And that's how it starts. So that's 1820.
Yeah.
Right. So Bleeding Kansas, let's check the date on that. Bleeding Kansas. Bleeding Kansas is in... Okay, so Bleeding Kansas is a series of violent civil confrontations in the Kansas Territory and to the lesser extent in western Missouri between 1854 and 1856. It emerged from political ideological debate over the legality of slavery in the proposed state of Kansas. Now, it's funny because it says belligerents, anti-slavery settlers, pro-slavery settlers, and then it says commanders and leaders, and on one side it says John Brown.
just John Brown.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So the conflict was characterized by years of electoral fraud, raids, assaults, and murders carried out in Kansas Territory and neighboring Missouri by pro-slavery border ruffians, and retaliatory raids carried out by anti-slavery free staters. According to Kansapedia, of the Kansas Historical Society, 56 political killings were documented during this period. The total may be as high as 200. It was called a tragic prelude or an overture to the American Civil War, which immediately followed it. The Kansas and Nebraska Act of 1854 called for popular sovereignty. The decision about slavery would be made by popular vote of the territory settlers rather than by legislators in Washington, D.C. And so also, let's not forget, so this was James Buchanan, I think, who did this. But also, well, John Brown's they beheaded people who did not own slaves, but they were on the pro-slavery side, and that's why I say it's like, is John Brown a terrorist? Almost certainly, right?
Yeah. No, there's no disputing that, right? It was violence for political ends.
Yeah, and he also has Harper's Ferry, which he does an armed uprising. He believed he would inspire other people to rise up.
Yeah.
And also at this time, this is when states had their, like, they kind of, even though the Constitution was made to have a centralized military, states still had their own militias, right?
Yeah.
And so that was another thing, because the states had militias that fueled a lot of the stuff too. Now, because of the whole thing, there's also the filibuster guys, right? That's what they are, right? It's the filibusters, where they're trying to expand Cuba. You have the war in Mexico.
In the South?
Yeah. So they
I'm not sure.
They were trying to make Cuba a slave state.
Yeah, because they had their fucking big goal of South America being the South's fucking plantation, basically.
But that's why the Mexican War starts.
Yes.
It's literally over this expansion of slavery. So
are you talking about William Walker?
I mean, that might be one of the guy's names. Is he a filibuster?
Oh my god, he drove the Manifest Destiny and is the filibuster guy.
Yes. Yeah. So it's all Manifest Destiny is literally actually, like, people think it's about like colonialism and stuff.
Yeah.
It was really about pushing people to settle that area so they could expand slave states.
Yeah.
Because they were concerned that if free states got an advantage in the Congress, then slavery would be made illegal. So we know this is a problem back when the Missouri Compromise happens. You know, the last founder of the United States is there, and so they had, first you have Washington have the opportunity to do it, then Monroe, and then I think it's Buchanan, right? So they basically do nothing but kick the can down the road to make the Civil War inevitable. So to say that the Civil War was over slavery is accurate, but it's also an oversimplification of it. Because it's also caused by very terrible leadership and people who were too afraid to actually rise up and actually deal with a problem that they knew was going to be a problem in the future, and they knew this is a looming problem that was going to tear the country apart.
Oh my god, he made himself the president of Nicaragua.
But the thing is that the Jacksonian democracy is really what affects people in the South, because what's fucked up about the Manifest Destiny is after the Trail of Tears, they kick these people out and they make treaties with them saying, okay, we won't kick you out again, right? Like, this will be your territory forever. With Manifest Destiny and all these like conflicts, they end up kicking them out again. The people who were in the Trail of Tears were displaced like at least 3 times, I think. And that's all before the Civil War even happens.
Yeah.
And then in the Civil War, in the Civil War, there was even factions on each side. So, like, famously, the Cherokee kept their slaves after the Civil War and fought partially in a limited contingent conflict in the South against the Northerners, because they also, like, they were called the civilized tribe, because that's what they called civilized back then, is when they owned slaves, I guess. And this was a controversial thing. I believe it's been settled now, but like the Cherokee, basically, like, anyone who is a slave also didn't get Cherokee citizenship, and that was like a big controversy not that long ago. So now let's hear the master class give a history lesson. Oh my God.
Viewer. Happy
That
4th.
was
You may say Independence Day.
bad.
I say 4th. I don't know why.
Shut the fuck up.
Is that accurate?
Well, I kind of like to let the documents speak for themselves.
Okay.
And so when you look at the Civil War, you had 11 states that seceded to become the Confederate States of America. And so these 11 states, when they left the United States, they all wrote a document of secession on why they left. And by the way, all
This
of the congressmen from those states gave farewell addresses on the floor of the House and Senate. They're public record. Anybody can get them.
Okay.
The Constitution requires us to keep record.
So they're gonna. So what I predict here, they're gonna. One of the states. Okay. One of the states in their secessionary document does not specifically cite slavery. Okay. It's because they already issued in a document a few weeks earlier that was all about the slavery. So they didn't put it in the official secession thing. So these racists try to act like that not all the states did it because of slavery, because one specific state didn't mention it. So I see what he's talking about here, and I'm already predicting this is what the narrative is going to be.
Of every speech made. So that's public record out there. So if you take the secession documents of the 11 states telling the world why we did what we did.
This guy has a shirt that says wall builders on it.
Every one of them says it's because of slavery. Every one of them.
Really?
Now, that's Southern documents. That's not a Northerner or anybody else. And, I'm from the South, but that's not anybody else saying, oh, you guys made it about slavery. They're the ones who said that. Without exception, all 11 said slavery's the issue. Now, you could say, well, it was economics.
Why is the Washington picture ripped? What the fuck?
I don't know.
Why is there a missing piece?
That's true, but the backbone of your economy was slavery.
Right.
And so that was economics. But you yourself, in your secession document, you're the one who said that we left because he's trying to end slavery. It's interesting. We often hear the Civil War is about states' rights, and the federal government is trying to tell the southern states what to do.
Right. And as Federalists, as conservatives, that's an argument that would appeal to us to a degree.
And so we think that it was all about states' rights, which is interesting, that in the Confederate Constitution, to be a member of the Confederate States of America, you are not allowed to end slavery. You had to maintain slavery. It's part of the Constitution. So if it's all about states' rights, what are you doing joining a group that won't let you have the right to decide what to do with that issue? So it really was about slavery, and that's maybe their constitution, their vice president.
Also legalizing pot. They were ahead of their time. That was really big.
That was a big issue back then.
Missouri, really big on legalizing weed.
Well, that's a border state. It was really the deep southern states like Alabama and all those states. Right. Yeah. So
that's a really random thing to throw in there.
Well, he's a comedian.
Really had this thing of,
huh?
You know him. He's a comedian.
Of slavery was the issue, according to them, according to their political platforms, according to their own constitutions, and according to their secession documents.
What about according to, we have this, I can touch this because I feel comfortable because it's very laminated. According to this man, Abraham Lincoln, if he could have kept the Union without ending slavery, and a lot of people say that that's what he would have done. He felt that it was necessary. So would he have done that? Would he have kept slavery?
Well, I see that the whole argument all the way up to that.
By the way, it looks a lot more ethnic than you usually think of Abraham Lincoln when you look at that. I mean, he could be Native American. He could be, I don't know, he could be Ukrainian, Uzbekistanian.
Yeah.
The point is, it's not Daniel Day-Lewis from the Crucible. Okay.
It's not. So with Lincoln,
the video is
leading up to all those years before the Civil War, through the abolition debates, there was no clear consensus that the Constitution
it's only a 1.25.
prohibited slavery. That pretty much left it.
Mostly because Southern accents kind of sound like they're speaking at half speed anyway.
To each state.
Right.
Now, the founding fathers,
when
they were doing the Constitutional Convention, they all agreed.
Huh?
I said, I still don't see how you were saying the Washington picture was ripped.
There's a whole missing portion under the bottom right corner.
if you give us 20 years, we're going to end slavery, which is why they put the date of 1808.
Look.
They all agreed that if you give us 20 years, we're going to end slavery, which is why they put the date of 1808.
Oh, that's another thing. This guy's bringing a good point too. So in those they did put timelines on when slavery had to end. Okay, I thought it was just faded. Like that's just where they only drew, because they'll do the bust, where they'll fade it on the sides. But if it doesn't look ripped to me, it just looks like they didn't draw the lower corner.
I can't fucking
maybe
zoom
it is.
I can't zoom in as easily on this.
That's
and
okay.
of course, you can't actually zoom in.
It doesn't matter.
1808. So 20 years after the Constitution was written, they thought they could get rid of slavery, they could ban the slave trade and be done with it. Even the pro-slavery states.
And why did they want to do that? Who would be included in those?
They ended this. They said that you can't import slaves, right? Which they thought would help, because they couldn't just outlaw it outright because they're pussies.
Yeah.
Right. So they thought if they outlawed the slave trade, the triangle trade, right, which was the worst part, that it would, be a step towards mitigating it, and it would end on its own, right? What do you think happened?
I don't even know where to start.
It raised the value of slaves. Slaves became worth more. Slaves became worth more.
Right, of course.
So it actually made the problem far worse.
Rarity, right? It was by demand.
Yeah, because you can't just like enslave people. You had to be born a slave.
Yeah. Fucking crazy.
It's interesting that when we did the Declaration of Independence, the longest single grievance in the Declaration was written by Thomas Jefferson, and it said, "We have been trying to end slavery in America, and the king won't let us." Because in 1773, you had Rhode Island, and you had Massachusetts and Connecticut, you had Pennsylvania, all do anti-slavery laws. And in 1774, the king said, "No. You're part of the British Empire. We have slavery."
We're pro-native and like anti-displacement.
Yeah.
You're going to have slavery. So at that point, founding fathers like Ben Franklin and Benjamin Rush and others said, "This is not right. We've been trying to free our own slaves. We don't like slavery. We don't want it."
Right.
And so you'll find that 41 of the signers of the Declaration owned slaves. It's not a question of how many owned slaves. What did they do once they had the right to end slavery? So when we separated in 1776, you'll find that so many of those guys freed slaves said, "This is what we've been waiting for. This is why we want to separate from Great Britain." And so the largest grievance in the Declaration is Thomas Jefferson saying, "We've been trying to end slavery, and they won't."
Yeah.
Let us. Jefferson had been introducing anti-slavery laws in his own state. His state would not allow him to free his own slaves, not just the British, but his state. So what happened was
it Jefferson or was it Washington who freed them at the time of his death?
Washington freed them at the time of his death. There was a loophole in the law that was added in 1782 to Virginia law that says, okay, we want people to be free. So when you die, you can free. But even when you die, you can free your slaves. They never allowed you to free what were called dowry slaves. And dowry slaves were the slaves that came through the wife. So Martha's slaves, George Washington, you can't free Martha's slaves. You can never free a dowry slave.
Wow.
So Jefferson, by the time it came to Jefferson, the legislature said, "What were we thinking about? That was a bad loophole." So they closed the loophole. He didn't even have that loophole at the time of his death. So what happened?
It's like, wow, you can't free dowry slaves. How do we solve this problem? Ban slavery, you fucking morons. Where's this is literally the libs compromising with Nazis. That's what this is. That's literally what this was. It's like, oh, you can free your slaves on death, but your wife's, she can only free them. Womp womp, sorry.
Happened was Jefferson wrote this anti-slavery piece in the Declaration, and he wrote,
oh my God,
because the Declaration says the unanimous declaration. They all agreed that the only thing we'll put in the Declaration is what all 13 states agree on. Jefferson said South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia would not agree that slavery was a big issue. And so we had to take that clause out.
Right. So the Civil War was a long time brewing. It didn't just come out of nowhere like a lot of people think.
But those three states thought that if you give us 20 years, we can be away from slavery. And they probably would have been, because slavery is economically.
80 years, it only got worse. 20 years and they take it all, they get rid of it. Is this guy on meth?
Well, they did think this at the time. He's not wrong.
Yeah, and then what? After 20 years, it's like, okay, we gave you a 20-year grace period. That's what they should have done. They should have said 20-year grace period. Most of us, right, 10 of the 13 states agreed if what he just said is correct, 10 of the 13 states agreed that slavery was an issue.
And
So
then
fuck
South
those three
Carolina,
states.
they like, I think it's South Carolina, they like kept doubling down, so 90% of their economy was slaves.
Yes, that was South Carolina. Yep. So what they should have done was, okay, 20 years. You think you'll be rid of it in 25 years? We'll give you 20 years. We'll give you 25 years. At that point, all those slaves go free. Nothing you can do about it. So far,
this is a good bit from Steven Crowder for once.
Unprofitable.
Right.
What kept it alive was 1803. The cotton gin comes in, and now a slave can do what 10 slaves used to do. So now it can make money.
That's another good point.
So it changed the whole.
That's another good point. That the cotton gin ended up. So slavery was not profitable until the cotton gin came. And then when the Civil War is about to happen, slavery is not profitable again.
But
they still fight for it.
Whole economy, slave economy.
That's not the only thing.
There was the belief.
Not the only thing. Colonialism was not profitable. I'll think about that. All the genocide, the Aztecs gone. You know, all these civilizations destroyed. All these cultures destroyed. You know, today what amounts to billions and billions of people.
Yep.
You know, if you want to look at the Black Book of Communists, which counts like, you know, future births and stuff to get to its 1 million, right? And all of that meant nothing because every state that participated in colonialism lost money. It was not profitable for any of them. What a waste of human life.
And the other thing is, imagine how much human history was lost because these colonial projects would just decimate, rape, and pillage the entire fucking country. Imagine the historical shit that we can't learn now because of Europe.
Well, maybe one day we'll have time machines.
Yeah, and we can go back and kill the crown.
Yeah. We came back and we're the time. We're the time. We came back to call you a honky.
By 1808, we can get this done in America.
So, and before we move on, what are these here? I see some.
These are all Civil War.
Oh, and by the way, sorry, I should have said this is actually the picture that was used, right? That they used.
It's more than it's like they thought it would be profitable, you know. And then like the one place that is profitable, Haiti. Look what happens to France.
That's what they used to build the Lincoln Memorial. That is the picture that was used for that, and this is the negative that was used for that picture.
Oh shit!
So, Abraham Lincoln.
Now you're looking at what looked at Lincoln, essentially.
Yeah,
so,
that's cool.
So all of this. So all that to say,
that's fucking cool.
that at the time of Lincoln, slavery was not a settled constitutional issue,
right?
Because the Constitution didn't ban it. So his job is to take an oath to uphold the Constitution.
I think he realizes that he can't interject his bullshit here because he will probably get called out for it. Maybe that's what's going on.
He made the weed joke.
Which he would have done that if slavery had to be required. He hated.
Yeah, but that was clearly something that was
like
actually there. I know.
He was against it. He spoke against it. But when it became clear after the split that I can't save the Union without ending slavery, then that's where he went.
Okay. And he did that with this, I assume.
Well, this
hit.
Yeah, actually. By the way, is that maybe a little short for you as a crutch?
It's
it almost is belt height. This came from a black soldier in the.
This is a crutch?
This is a crutch. That was a black soldier in Civil War.
It actually seems like he's pretty tall. Oh, no, wait, it's a crutch. I was thinking cane. Never mind. Oh, wow. That was tiny tip.
By the way,
that was midget tip.
Wow, that's tiny. What the fuck?
He had his legs blown off.
Yeah, probably. That's fucking crazy.
Oh, we're there.
It's a far cry from Wilt Chamberlain.
Yeah, he would not have been the guy on the basketball team.
No, he wouldn't. It was a Canadian guy who invented basketball.
While we're there, I want to introduce you to a guy, a very famous guy in Civil War. His name is John Clem.
Okay.
John Clem, for bravery at the Battle of Chickamauga, newspaper reported that for what he did in that battle, his bravery is so great that Lieutenant Rosecrans saw his bravery on the battlefield and promoted him on the spot from being a private to being a sergeant.
Wow.
And then General Thomas came in and said, no, I need you on my staff, and made him a lieutenant and put him on his staff, on the general staff. He's 12 years old.
What?
That is the soldier.
What the fuck?
So that's his.
That's not. No. This is a black guy, but I want you to see how small they were.
Well, it's hard to tell with the photo negatives and the 9 that's black and white. I couldn't really see. Okay. No, that's clearly a white 12.
It's a white 12-year-old.
I don't see color.
Here he is. You don't see color.
I'm colorblind.
There's my dad.
We're all the human race.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry.
Nice job. So this is him too. So you see how small, that's his soldiers, that is his sergeant's uniform.
Wow.
He's about this tall. and so, I mean, they were small,
That made him
really small
leave.
back then. And he was smaller than usual. But they were all pretty small. So this is from the Mass 54, the movie Glory.
Yep.
This is one of the soldiers that was featured and would have been featured in that movie Glory.
Matthew Broderick probably could have actually used that.
He probably could. He's about the right height for that. So that is from the Civil War. This is a hand grenade from the Civil War.
Okay.
What you do, load it up with powder, and this is your firing pin right there. And it looks like a Nerf football.
I was going to say we used to have Velcro pads,
That's
and
right.
we would throw
That's
them over
right.
the game. Yeah.
Well, you would throw this to the other side, and when it hit, it would blow up. And so that was your early hand grenade.
Ages 7 and up with that one.
Yeah, well, ages 12 and up. You know, that's what, ages 12 and up.
And these are swim goggles.
Yes, they look exactly like it. They fit you so well.
Yeah.
Actually, the guys who are using the cannons, this would protect their eyes
Small
from
powder.
Cannon fire. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So that's all the guys in artillery. These are all things related to Civil War. And actually, one of the famous generals in the Civil War was James A. Garfield.
Okay.
And he was so good at what he did that Lincoln said, I got to help you in Congress. I need help bad. So Garfield came back. He was a major general. He gets in Congress. He helps pass the first 23 civil rights laws that are passed for equality in Congress. He becomes the 20th president. And this happens to be a letter from him. It's kind of, how do I want to say this? It's not what you expect of a president. But in this letter, he says here, he's a preacher. And
I can't believe we would call someone's wife that.
well, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I can't read this at all. I don't know how you can read this.
He says he preached 19 times in a revival meeting. There were 34 editions, and he baptized 31 by immersion. So here you got a guy who is a guy we have to know as a president who was a revival preacher. Wow. I mean, we don't think about faith with these guys, and that was a really big part of their life.
Well, let me see. How do you juxtapose when people talk about Abraham Lincoln and the belief that a black man was worth 3/5 that of a white?
Oh, I love you brought that up. The best answer to that is to go to black commentators on the Constitution. Go to Frederick Douglass, because Frederick Douglass escaped from slavery. He made it to Boston. He started speaking first in New York for the New York Abolitionist Society, and then Boston Warner.
Is Stephen Crowder about to learn something real about this guy?
Do you know about that?
Which part?
Where he said, well, first of all, Stephen was wrong in what he said, that black people were worth 3/5 of a person.
3/5. Yeah.
Well, it's not. It was slaves specifically.
Right, because that. How do they get the value of a person though?
Okay, so. Well, for starters,
That seems subjective.
So here's the thing: the slave owners wanted their slaves counted in population, right? Because they wanted more seats.
Yes, of course.
In Congress, right? So this is a thing that the racists today will say. It's like, oh, it was the anti-slavery Northerners who were the racist ones who said they're only 3/5 of a human. When they're talking about the seats, right? So it was a compromise that the slaves would be worth 3/5 of a person.
Of a vote.
Yes, but it's not like they had votes. It's not like they were given votes to begin with.
It wasn't. Yes, it wasn't representation. It was conceding power to slave owners. Is what it was.
Yes,
it
was a compromise.
And he was trained at the feet.
Yeah. Fucking ridiculous.
Of what are called radical abolitionists, Garrett and Smith and some of those guys. And they said, we have a real problem in America. We have a pro-slavery constitution. It's been flawed from the beginning. We need a new
I think this must be a Chinese account because they said dogs. It's a very common Chinese insult. That's kind of funny. When are we going to bow to China? Is that when their economy collapses? When's their next submarine gonna sink? When are their tofu drag ships gonna sink?
That was so funny.
Like, China's building all the ships in the world right now. All the ships, but they can't even fucking float. Okay.
Constitution. So these hardcore abolitionists.
Anyway, we've got more important shit to do than cover China right now. So you can watch if you want.
Constitution's a flawed document. He said, I believe that. They were taught. He said, but when I was hired full-time by the Massachusetts Abolition Society to speak full-time, he said, I decided I better read it for myself. He said, when I read the Constitution, he said, I saw that in it, there was not a single pro-slavery clause. It was anti-slavery and everything. Well, then what do you do with 3/5? 3/5, if you go back to the debates in 1787, 3/5, the southern states said, we want to count every black And the northern states said, count them, but free them first. They need to be free because you're not representing them. You're using them. Right. And so what happened was they arrived at this compromise and said, okay, every black you count, you get more pro-slavery representation in Congress. So they went back and forth and said, okay, here's the deal. We'll let you count 3/5 of your black.
Do you think Southern historians, Civil War historians from the South, are more inclined to be racists, or do you think that when they actually look into it, they actually realize that
I think
racism is a massive part of the Civil War? Like, I feel like they would come to that conclusion. Yeah, like I don't think that they would have any political injection into it if they were good at their job.
Blacks. And so that cut pro-slavery representation by 40% in Congress. It was nothing about the worth of the individuals. Right. It was about the representation from them. And so when people hear that the Constitution says blacks are only worth 3/5, Frederick Douglass said, I checked it. That's not true. That was an anti-slavery provision to limit that.
And how long did that last?
It's still in the Constitution. It was done away with the Civil Rights Amendments 13.
Even endorsed this one as like an anti-slavery thing. As like a, what do you call it? Measure? Anti-slavery measure?
Frederick Douglass said, I checked it. That's not true. That was an anti-slavery provision.
Anti-slavery provision. I feel like 3/5 of a person for representation is basically the same as saying that land ownership gets you a right to vote. Owning slaves shouldn't get you more of a vote. Fuck you. Like that's absurd. That is not an anti-slavery compromise. That is something that sounds like it would encourage the purchase of slavery, the purchase of slaves, and the further implementation of slavery. I don't know. That kind of seems like some government cheese incentive. Okay, is that just my camera that's not working?
I guess so.
What the fuck?
To limit that.
And how long did that last?
It's still in the Constitution. It was done away with the Civil Rights Amendments, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, and 1865 through 1870. That's no longer an issue. Right. So
they got to it pretty quickly.
Yeah. And it was interesting that when they did that, I mean, back in the founding era, it was the anti-slavery founding fathers who came up with the 3/5 clause to put less pro-slavery people in Congress.
And does that come with being so close to taxation without representation as well there? Because
you weren't representing them. That's right. You were counting them, not representing them. And that's what the North said. This was a fun debate. They said, you guys in the South, you say that blacks are your property, and you're counting your property to get more pro-slavery.
Surprisingly, not bad.
Reps.
But it's mostly because Steven Crowder hasn't been talking for most of it.
So we're going to count our horses and our cows and our chairs and our brooms and
right now someone's getting mad and say, you're comparing black slaves to horses and cows. Right. No, we're not. They remove the historical context. For example, you see this sometimes where when you are fighting really bad enemies abroad, for example, with foreign policy, sometimes you have to partner or form coalitions with a lesser of evil. Yeah. Sometimes the historical context is, well, why do we have relations with Saudi Arabia? We're not really happy. Yeah, exactly. Weren't big fans necessarily of Stalin. The 3/5 was a means to an end to just make sure that they weren't being misrepresented. That's right. And I appreciate it. I tried to lay that one up and you handled it superbly. So I got another one for you here. I'm distracted by the hand grenades. What was this? Was this in case you needed to get rid of your leg and turn it into this?
Well, that's right. If you get shot right there, I will promptly take your leg off for you. And to be a good surgeon.
That is central.
Oh, yeah, I would say so right now. I wonder what DNA would show if we tested that for blood. But at that point,
why have you not done that? What? Find out whose leg was cut off by that saw. What?
Point in time.
Probably not a white guy.
May not have been. If I could not.
I don't understand. Why say that? Are you trying to be funny?
Take your leg off and stop the bleeding within a minute, I could not be a surgeon. So and you're going to get no.
That's a horrible incentive. I want a surgeon to take as much care as possible. Take your time, doc.
No, because you get no painkillers. And if I don't do it in under a minute, you will bleed out and bleed to death. So I have to be able to do it, take it off, and stop the bleeding.
So this actually used to cut off a leg?
This was used to cut off a leg.
Oh my God.
That's fucking crazy. Under a minute to sever your leg. You just have to
sever it and stop the bleeding.
Yeah. Fucking crazy.
So the whole procedure took a minute. Look at the legs.
Oh my God, the legs under the table.
On the Civil War.
Children could see that.
And you see this coming at you, and you've got no kind of deadening. There's nothing.
There's no way that they didn't die from infection.
That was the most common cause of death.
Like, they must have died from infection immediately after getting their leg cut off by a contaminated saw.
That was the most common
So,
cause of death.
Like,
I'm watching. There are
Was
actually
that because Abraham Lincoln's wife was taking it out? She had the opium going on, right? That is true. That is true. She did have the.
there was she had a lot of depression problems. A lot of depression problems.
Okay, so let me ask. That is absolutely terrifying. I thought, no, you actually cutting off your leg. Imagine that. Do you just think of how much more intimate battle was back then?
One of the in Vicksburg, Mississippi.
I would say that it would be less intimate, to be completely honest. Like, yeah, we've got artillery and shit, but like, you're not up in people's faces like you are today's war. Like, today's war is much closer combat. Like, there's no, yeah, it's kind of fucking weird.
There's battlefield memorabilia kind of stuff that's there. And one of them is they would cut off your leg. They would give you one of the bullets to bite. And it's where they get biting the bullet. And they have bullets there. They're bitten by guys. The bullet's about that big. And when it's over, it's about that big. And it is as thin as paper because they just keep biting on it.
Were these stupid people? They were shaving. They had leather strokes. Why don't they just bite on leather? What, give them lead?
I don't know.
Okay.
They bite the bullet. And there are actually photographs.
Pencil. Go to town.
Yeah, that's right. But there are actually pictures of where a surgeon was in the middle of sawing off a guy's leg. It's halfway through. And they all look up and smile for the camera. And then he goes back to sawing again. And the guy who's getting his leg sawed off is actually looking at the camera, smiling for the
bullet.
It's like, oh my.
Do you think maybe it started with one guy bit the bullet to show how tough?
That's a pretty cool photo. That's a pretty hard photo, if that is the case.
Can we insert that photo?
All look up and smile. And there are actually photographs.
Pencil. Go to town.
That's right. But there are actually pictures of where a surgeon was in the middle of sawing off a guy.
Okay, I need to find this. Civil War picture, surgery in process. Let's see. Let's see if we can't find it. That might be it. There's a whole PBS thing. Like a whole PBS thing. I was hoping that there would be actual pictures, but there isn't. Let's go back to this one. Surgical photo. Library of Congress. That might work. Library of Congress. What do we reckon?
I mean, Steven Crowder was too lazy to insert the photo.
I know. That's why I'm trying to find it. That might be the one. That's probably the one. Well, I don't think the bloke is in the picture. I don't think you can see him. I think he's got something in his hand. They're definitely doing something. I think that might be it. That might be the photo.
His leg, it's halfway through, and they all look up and smile for the camera, and then he goes back to sawing again. And the guy who's getting his leg sawed off is actually looking at the camera, smiling for the
bullet.
It's like, oh my.
Do you think maybe it started with one guy bit the bullet to show how tough he was, and then no one else thought, I can bite the leather belt? Like, well, Dennis bit the bullet, so now I got to do it. Otherwise, I'm never going to hear the end of it from the guys that are going to do a movie about them with glory.
Yeah.
Morgan Freeman's never going to let me live this down.
No telling where it came from.
Gosh.
I see that stuff, and I cringe to think what it was like to live back then. And 620,000 guys gave their lives one side or the other. A lot sacrificed their lives to end slavery. A lot sacrificed their lives to defend a system they didn't really understand.
Right.
A lot of Southern guys, they weren't fighting for slavery. They're fighting because the North invaded.
That's important. That's an important delineation, because I think a lot of people, where they say, well, we see the Confederate flag as a symbol of heritage and we don't see it the way you see it. I think a lot of people from the South don't see it that way, but like the leadership, when they had the opportunity to clarify their position, they made it very clear that they wanted to leave because of slavery. Let me ask you this. This is something we hear a lot about Young Turks, MSNBC, CNN. It's sort of accepted as a truism, the Southern strategy. So yeah, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and if you look back then, Republicans obviously they're the ones about freeing the slaves, and if you look at even the Civil Rights Act, but there was a Southern strategy where it swapped. What do you say to that?
Well, it certainly was not that way for the first more than a century.
Right.
I mean, a piece like this This is a hit card for the Klan.
Like, a hit card for the Klan. That's fucking crazy. It's well documented that in the 1950s, the parties switched. It was specifically around, I believe, Jim Crow laws, I think. Or like civil rights, something. The Democrats were like, no,
you want
this
to know
is
one of the
fucking
big reasons why it switched?
The Republicans wanted to, it's the Dixiecrats.
Because black people in the South were getting elected. So the party of the South was the Democrats.
Yeah. Yeah, and all the black people were Democrats, right?
I mean, not necessarily.
No, like all the ones elected, like most of them were Democrats.
I mean, I'm just saying that's one of the reasons why the switch happens is because black people got elected as Democrats.
Yeah, because I was watching a video on this topic specifically, and it was some kind of legislative row is basically what made it switch. Is that there was just some policy came in which completely upended the parties. There was a policy, I can't fucking remember what it was. I can't remember for the life of me.
Yeah. This shows, and the lynching's a big deal for the Klan. So they have given you now the names.
Almost eight when you really think about it.
Yeah. Thank you. 63 names here that need to be taken care of. 63 names.
Trying to get our
Republican members
Lebanese
of the legislature.
correspondent
There
on.
are 50 blacks. There are 13 whites. Now, people say, wait a minute, they didn't lynch whites. Yeah, there were 4,800 lynchings.
Look at
and the
your
4,800
messages on
lynchings
your
that happened with
personal,
those
and they gave me a
4,800
thumbs
lynchings,
up.
1,300 were white.
What?
I told her to go look at her messages on her personal page, and she gave me a thumbs up on the Lebanon page she runs to that, but hasn't replied to the personal messages.
Yeah.
I mean, she's reporting on her country being bombed, so she's pretty busy.
Yeah. Okay.
But the fact that it's like literally like 4 or 5 a.m. in Lebanon, and she's still up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, okay, so I was correct. It was the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It was the argument, it was 1964, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. In 1964, Republican Barry Goldwater publicly opposed the new law, arguing that it expanded the power of the federal government to a dangerous level. It was an argument that led to a final and decisive switch. Black voters who've historically been loyal to Republicans because of the 1866 Civil Rights Act had already been switching to the Democrats. However, upon hearing Goldwater's argument against the Civil Rights Act, the majority of the black voters left the Republican Party in favor of the Democrats. They saw the Democratic Party as advocates for equality and justice. I'm fucking struggling here. While the Republicans were too concerned with getting keeping the status quo in America. Wow, nothing has changed.
You know who Goldwater is?
No, I don't.
He's the guy who would block black students from going to the mixed schools.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Incredible. By 1980,
he's the America First guy.
Okay. So as the 60s and 70s continued, Democrats sought to reform in other places, such as abortion and schools and school prayer. White Southern Democrats began to resent how much the Democratic Party was intervening into the rights of the people. By 1980s, white Southern Democrats had become Republicans, and the majority of the South was now Republican. The Republican Party is solidly conservative, and the Democratic Party is a liberal one. Sure.
3,500 black. The lynchings were Republicans. Now, the deal was just about any...
White Republicans?
White Republicans. You couldn't lynch any white because some might be Democrats. But blacks, that's a different thing.
Right.
So you could go at it that way. And so what you find is when you look after once the 13th and 14th Amendment were passed, you could elect blacks to office in the South. And in states like Louisiana, states like South Carolina, Mississippi, you had more blacks than you did whites. So what happens is, for example, the first 137 blacks elected in Louisiana were all Republicans. Right. The first 41 blacks in Texas, the first 190 blacks in South Carolina, the first 99 in Alabama, 112 in Mississippi, et cetera. So the switching of parties, no, blacks were strong Republicans at that point in time. And they say, well, you know, that started changing in the 60s, the Southern strategy. Strom Thurmond. All right, Strom Thurmond was a Democrat, no question. He ran against Harry Truman because Harry Truman did some really good civil rights stuff, helped desegregate the military. He would not kowtow to the Democrats in his party that were racist.
South Carolina's sporting center is named after this guy.
So they ran a Democrat against him, Strom Thurmond, the Dixiecrat Party. So Strom Thurmond runs as a Southern Democrat against, and you know, Harry Truman, I mean, he is from a Southern state, a border state. He was raised in a racist atmosphere, but he did the right thing with helping civil rights. And so Strom Thurmond is a Democrat. Well, Strom Thurmond became a Republican. He sure did. And he became a Republican because he changed his philosophy, because he became the first Senate Republican from the South to hire blacks onto his staff as major positions. And so it's not Democrats who did that. It was a Republican who did that. He left the Democrat Party because of their positions. So when they point to Strom Thurmond, you've also got to look at the fact that he also changed his policy positions, and he was no longer.
He became less racist.
He became less racist, and actually he tried to break through the barrier. He had a lot of education, a lot of.
Well, you know, I think we're going to do a whole installment because you have so much here on Black history. So before we do that,
before we do that, here's what I say for those who say in the South. I say, okay, let's assume you're right. Let's assume that Democrats switched to the Republican Party. I'm going to take any Southern state in the 70s, 80s, 90s. You're going to have 1,000 people elected to office every election. You're going to have your local people, your county people, your others, and it was called the Solid Democrat South for a reason, because Democrats not. So I want you to find me any 10 offices in the South where the Democrats became Republicans and got elected. You just show me 10 out of 1,000. Nobody's shown me more than 2 or 3. Well, you got Strom Thurmond and you got David Duke, and David Duke went back to the Democrat Party. They can show me 2 or 3.
Right.
Show me, if you're saying that the thing, you got to show me a majority. Otherwise, your premise doesn't hold up. Yeah. You can't even show me 10 out of 1,000. So this is what people repeat without thinking about it. And there's certainly not evidence enough to prove that it was a shift, what they call the Southern strategy.
So the Republican Party is still the party of Lincoln.
Yes, I don't think they know that, because I don't think they know what Lincoln believed, and I don't think they knew the original platform. This happens to be the original Republican platform. That's the very first one. There's only 9 planks in the platform. 7 of the 9 deal with civil rights, equality, making all people equal, equality in pay, etc. That's the original Republican platform, and I'll bet you most Republicans have no clue what it is. This is the second Republican platform in 1860, 17 planks. This is the third Republican platform, compares the Democrats and the Republicans side by side. This is the first platform to call for a constitutional amendment to abolish slavery. So I would say most Republicans today don't know what Lincoln believed, although the platforms tell us what he believed. But no question that Lincoln was anti-slavery.
Okay, I guess I was going to say I was going to ask you what you believe the most common misconceived notion of the Civil War was, but I think that we've addressed it in full. It seems to be that a lot of people don't think it was actually about slavery. And of course, we have more segments. You can just hit subscribe or notifications on YouTube. Let us know.
We will not. But that was surprisingly fine. Now,
of this belief, how this belief gained prominence,
hell yeah,
and what happened as a result.
Now, this one could be boring. I have 2. They're both history channels. One is 20 minutes, one is 50 minutes.
This belief. So without further ado, let's begin. So manifest.
The snowmobiler, hang on. A snowmobiler who crashed into parked Black Hawk helicopter awarded $3 million. Oh, the Black Hawk was parked on the snowmobile trail.
Oh, no shit.
To expand and move across North America, spreading their institutions and traditions.
Oh my God. Vape to earn crypto project. Puffpaw raises $6 million for blockchain vapes.
Okay. This seems like it's going to put me to sleep. So let's go to the next one. Where are they?
Are you aware of a CIA psychological profile about you, sir? Would you be interested in hearing what the CIA had to say? This secret study portrays as a brilliant but dangerous megalomaniac who is likely to pursue his own aims in disregard of U.S. interests. He's an uncertain ally. Shall I go on, or would you prefer that I stop, sir?